We're good? Okay, so we have Tammy and Christy, from the Board of Barbering and Cosmetology here. This is the statement that was put out that we actually put out on our website and has been gaining some traction. This has actually been in place for like what, over 2 years? Okay. You know, states like California, like Illinois, have somewhat limited resources. It's difficult to get the word out sometimes. So a lot of people don't know about this, but what it essentially says, according to the statement, is, which has been on the books for a while, is that estheticians cannot do microneedling treatments, okay? And that also applies to dermaplaning as well, from my reading of it, because you've got removal of any skin by means of razor edge tool or similar device, okay? So what this means is that if you have estheticians in your spa, which most people do, and you want them to do microneedling, according to the rules, they can't do that. Now, these ladies who we've been involved with for a while, they're very sweet. Don't shoot the messenger. They saw our post and were nice enough to come in and make sure that people had questions answered if they had any about microneedling and dermaplaning. So why don't we start off by just make sure your mics are on. Just if you want, just kind of introduce yourself, kind of who you are, what you do, and what the Board of Cosmetology does, and then maybe a brief statement about what your understanding is of the rule, and then you can run like hell.
Okay. I'm happy to be here today, not from the medical board.
Right.
So my name's Christy Underwood. I'm the executive officer of the Board of Barbering and Cosmetology.
I'm Tammy Guess. I'm the board's project manager.
So just a quick background on what we do. We license the estheticians and cosmetologists, barbers, all the beautification aspect of it. So we are a consumer protection board. We are only concerned, our main focus is to protect the consumers. And we have a lot of interest in the aesthetics field. It's growing and rapidly changing every day. So we're happy to be here today. This talk earlier was just fascinating to us, and again, it makes us very thrilled that we work for our board and not the medical board, our partners. But we are concerned. Our main purpose for our licensees is beautification, and that's how we try to differentiate between what an esthetician does and where it crosses into the medical side. That's our first question we always ask. When we do inspections, it's our first question we ask. It should be for beautification, not for treatment, not for any type of acne treatment or scar treatment. So a couple things, just real quick. We've, like it was mentioned, this isn't new. Estheticians cannot penetrate the skin, which has to do with the microneedling. They also can't use any metal needles, period. So that's the other aspect of microneedling, is it's metal needles, and estheticians are prohibited from using metal needles, as well as anything that might be used in a manner that's disapproved by the FDA. So those are specific statutes for us, for all of our licensees. That we don't define the depth. We do say that they can't go below the epidermis. However, we don't list. I know there's a lot of discussion on the depth of certain needles, and we don't have that defined. We simply just have what we mentioned. You can't go beyond the epidermis, can't use metal needles, can't use anything disapproved in a manner by the FDA. Uh-huh.
What if they have an electrolysis license?
Hang on real quick. Just for the sake of the recording,
yes.
Can you repeat the question?
So the question is, for an electrolysis license, it totally becomes a completely different aspect. You can use the metal needles for electrolysis, if you hold the electrolysis license.
For electrology.
How about for microneedling?
They're allowed to use the electrolysis needles for electrology.
No, I mean electrolysis license, someone who has it, they can still do it.
No, they're licensed only in electrology. Yeah, they are not estheticians.
What are the things that an RN who's not a licensed esthetician, just an RN cannot do that would be part of the Board of Cosmetology?
So the question is, what can an RN do who's not licensed as an esthetician?
Not do.
What can they not do? Okay, so I guess, so really, can an RN do aesthetic services like microneedling if they are not licensed as an esthetician?
Yes, they can. They're exempt under 7319 of our statutes, medical professionals, as long as it is in their course of work to perform it and they are trained in it, they are exempt from our law.
And lash extensions?
Lash extensions, I'm not sure.
That
I mean, like-
falls under our scope of practice for cosmetology and estheticians, and it would depend on if the RN was trained in that. That's not normally a service that an RN would perform in a course of regular business, so there might be some problems with that.
We had a problem with that
Yeah.
years ago.
It would depend on the medical board because that's not generally an RN service. It's generally a Board of Barbering and Cosmetology service.
They can do give facials.
Yes, if it's
They can
in,
give
within their
facials.
course of training and treatment, then they're exempt from our law.
Now, I have a question. If a medical spa or a surgery office has, their main business is to do medical spa treatments like Botox and whatnot, but they have an esthetician who does facials, do they need to have a license under the Board of Cosmetology to operate as a cosmetology center?
Yes, they do.
Okay.
So it's an establishment license. We don't differentiate between med spas or nail spas or hair salons. It's just an establishment license. But regardless if the esthetician, cosmetologist is working, there is a establishment license that's needed.
Makes sense. So if you're going to be employing estheticians, you need to have an establishment
Right.
license, even if you're a medical spa. Question, yes?
Another question about microneedling.
That's why they're here.
Micro rollers that are being sold online and for home use.
Rollers for home use?
Go ahead.
We don't regulate any retail sales. It's out of our jurisdiction. So if they buy it for personal use, we are concerned with what's happening in the shop or salon or spa.
And it was mentioned earlier, I know, about lasers, how the marketing is done, and I would just piggyback on that it's so important. We find people all the time who have lasers and microneedling who have been sold these items saying that, just estheticians, not even in med spas, who are purchasing very expensive equipment and then getting fined by us because they have this equipment. So it's really, really important to make sure when things are being purchased that the estheticians are targeted by the marketers, that they can use these machines when they can't.
I do have one thing to add too. At times we'll run into an occasion where there's an RN who is also a licensed esthetician. If she's performing a medical service, she doesn't want to represent herself as an esthetician at that time. So she would literally want to flip her aesthetic license over so that there's no confusion to the customer in that she's operating in an RN fashion and not in an aesthetic fashion at that time. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Question.
My understanding is that the State Board of Cosmetology approves estheticians to use the dermatube.
That's correct. We don't necessarily
I'm
approve
sorry,
the actual.
Christy, would you just repeat the question? Just
Yes.
'cause
So the question was, can estheticians use Dermatude? And we don't necessarily, we do not approve certain products. So it's not necessarily the product that we've approved, but the Dermatude is the
Polycarbonate, it's made of polycarbonate instead of metal.
Right.
So it bypasses that regulation.
So technically, if there was a microneedling machine made of something besides metal, it could be used by an esthetician?
Not necessarily now in view of all the FDA
Right.
information that's been coming out, because we also have a portion of our law that says you cannot use a device in a manner disapproved by the FDA. So you would definitely want to make sure that Dermatude or whatever device you were using was in compliance with FDA before you started using it.
What is dermatube?
It's a microneedling device that's made of polycarbonate, and their device does not go past the epidermal layer. So our Section 991 that we consider invasive procedures, they bypass those two holdups.
Pressure then? Because
It's
not made out of metal.
sorry?
Is that I thought it was you couldn't pierce the skin. I thought you couldn't pierce
Past the epidermal layer.
So you
Yeah.
can't pierce the skin past the epidermal layer, period. But you also can't use a metal needle.
Needle.
So that,
Lance a blemish. You could
Lan-
actually lance it without a needle, I think it'd be fine.
We-
If I use a needle.
We do allow extractions, manual extractions, and so you could do that. We don't recommend that they pierce anything because piercing is in the medical law. Under 2052, under,
With microneedling, you are piercing the skin, you're saying.
Not with a poly.
right.
right,
Right.
our law says not past the epidermis, not made of metal, and not in a manner disapproved by the FDA. So to get around that, you would have to meet each of those three criteria. Dermatude meets two of them. They're polycarbonate, and they don't go past the epidermis. But there's, in view of recent FDA information, there might be question if they are okay with the FDA.
And we also would, if somebody were injured by a dermatude or something similar, that would be an investigation we would take on to see if an esthetician was performing that and then actually went below the epidermis. So it would result in an investigation from our board as well.
One more question. Has the board ever considered creating more opportunities for training versus just pulling back on all the resources that you're giving?
So the question is about training and resources.
Training for estheticians?
Well, right now, that's what we're talking about. So yes, would you ever consider like having a training on microneedling and then they getting certified in that, rather than saying we're delegating this up down to nurses? And so what's basically happening is that all processes are getting pushed up to doctors who really don't want to be doing those all the same.
Right. So a couple of years ago, there was a group that tried to establish a master esthetician license, which would expand our current scope. So our scope of practice for an esthetician is set in law. So to change it, it would have to go, through a legislator and have a bill and go through the entire legislative process. There was a group that looked at trying to get a master esthetician license who could, an esthetician, I believe they were asking for an additional 600 hours of training. Right now, the esthetician training is 600 hours, to allow them to do different types of services, more advanced services, and it did not get through the legislative process. So
what
that's
you're
why
talk-
it's set.
So in order to affect the change that you're asking for, as far as additional training and exceptions, what is the process that people would have to go through? It's the legislative process, correct?
Correct. The legislative process start with local assembly member or senator to see if they would carry a bill. The board supported it, actually. It was a group based out of San Diego, and the board was supportive in looking at trying to extend the esthetician license or add another one, but it wasn't successful through the legislative process.
Yes, sir.
The certification is necessary for medical tattoo right now. Has that changed at all recently? Medical tattoo.
Is there a certification for medical tattoo? Do you have any opinions on medical tattoos?
It's our understanding that that's handled through the Department of Public Health.
So typically,
Because they go, quite deep.
Right.
It's not under our regulatory authority.
and another question that I often get is from acupuncturists or tattoo artists. Do you have any opinion on whether they can do microneedling, or is that not under your jurisdiction?
It's not under our
Yeah, I wouldn't know.
Yeah.
Yeah, and my opinion on that is no, they cannot. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, so what's your opinion on the use of LED or light therapy by estheticians? Because we're getting a lot of mixed information that they can and can or cannot do.
So the question is, can estheticians use LED or light therapy? And the answer is they can. It was 2 years ago, was it, that they could not? But we actually heard from the industry, and we changed some regulations to make sure that estheticians can use LED.
So all colors?
Yes.
So it's LED, and it's for the sole purpose of beautification. So you wouldn't want to use an LED device for pain management because now you've crossed over to the medical practice of medicine. So it would just be within the aesthetic scope of practice, because we see LED devices marketed for pain management or services outside of the aesthetic scope of practice. So you'd want to watch that, and it's not to be confused with IPLs, because IPLs are off the table for our licensees.
So all this still applies for estheticians regardless if you have a doctor, if you're under a doctor?
Correct. The question is, does that all apply? Everything applies for the esthetician scope of practice exists regardless if you're under the supervision of a doctor. And that, yes, that's correct.
Right, a doctor can't supervise someone outside of their scope of practice. So they couldn't ask an esthetician who's only licensed in aesthetics to perform a medical procedure and say, I am supervising you to do this service. Yeah, they would be in trouble with their license, their medical license.
What's the enforcement appetite like at the board right now? Are you actively enforcing these? Are you investigating? What's going on?
We don't get a lot of consumer complaints on microneedling, for instance. We find it a lot. I'll be quite honest, we find it a lot in nail salons. So it's way above and beyond. Our concerns are usually not with the med spas. But it's, we have 23 inspectors for all of California. Our board has over 600,000 licensees, individuals, and we have 48,000 licensed salons and 23 inspectors. And they're spread out throughout California. Our inspections are based on, I know. It makes us laugh sometimes too, because sometimes we might cry. But our inspections are complaint driven. So what Alex mentioned earlier, Tammy and I were in the back going, oh, that's so true. Competitors. It's the competitors that start off our complaint process, ex-employees. We don't get a lot of that with the med spas for our area, but we get a lot of disgruntled ex-employees that want to complain. So we are complaint driven, though. If there's consumer harm that's been done, we're going to be out there pretty quickly. But obviously with 23 inspectors, we're very behind on inspections, and we don't have a target area. We don't target nail salons more than we target hair salons. When an inspector who's basically, so we have one inspector for the San Jose area. There's a lot of salons down here. That inspector might have a consumer complaint at a particular salon, and then they're going to catch or get to all the salons in that vicinity. So that's kind of how we target our inspections. So if there's a complaint across the street from you at a nail salon, that's how you're going to get an inspection. Like I mentioned, we find a lot of machines that estheticians are using. We're trying to improve our inspection process on that to make sure we know really what the intent of the use is and what that esthetician is trying to do. So the inspectors are now asking a lot more questions because there are machines that can go both ways. So we don't want to punish people who have a machine that might have a medical aspect to it, but that are totally using it just for beautification. So we're asking a lot more questions and hoping that that's helping everyone when we do go into some of these medical spas to make sure that the estheticians are within their scope.
What's the punishment for an esthetician who gets caught doing, say, microneedling or dermaplaning?
They would get cited for practice of medicine is the term in our law, and it's, I believe, is it $1,000?
I'm looking right now, 70 through 20, yep.
It's a $1,000 fine.
And does the Board of Cosmetology typically refer a supervising physician to the medical board if the esthetician underneath them is caught?
No. We work with the medical board, but it's usually on consumer harm cases. And we'll work with all, various boards under the Department of Consumer Affairs. So we work with the acupuncture board, the dental board. But it's usually when there's consumer harm that's been done. Not if we find a microneedling device, we issue a citation. A lot of times it's an esthetician who really got sold the microneedling roller and had no idea. We have an appeal process that if you receive a citation, you can come before the 3 members of our board and explain why you had the device, and usually the board takes that into consideration because it's a huge fine, not only for an establishment but for an individual esthetician. $1,000 is obviously would be a huge amount. So there's a process for potentially getting that fine reduced. You can go to the board and just basically, that's one of the reasons for an appeal, is that fine's outrageous. Can you help me? So we hear a lot of that as well.
And I guess my last question is, do you ever get referrals from, say, the medical board who are investigating a medical spa for a host of other reasons, and one of the things they realize is that there are estheticians there practicing medicine?
We would. One of our most common issues that we actually have is estheticians, and it's really, our estheticians are pretty good. It's one of our license types that I feel sort of do follow most of the laws and regulations. We get a lot of people that are not licensed to perform skin tag removal. Skin tag mole removal is probably one of our biggest issues that we have, that we might work with the medical, because it's a medical procedure, and the medical board would usually let us know if they find something like that, and vice versa, because it's really, really common in the industry.
And I guess finally, what advice would you give to, I mean, a lot of these folks have med spas, they're getting ready to open med spas. You know, estheticians play a big part in our industry. What advice would you give to them about how to deal with these regulations, and where can they find more information and things like that?
So on our website, and did we pass?
Yes.
So it's, some information was passed out. One of the best things that you can do is a self-inspection. So if you're an owner, whether you're a doctor or a non-doctor, and you're hiring an esthetician, have them perform self-inspections. It's a long sheet that you can get off of our website, and it's basically what an inspector would look at if they walk into an establishment. It's a list, it's a checklist, yes and no. Doing that regularly, we are an industry, we have lots of labeling issues. It is one of our most common violations is that items aren't disinfected properly or labeled correctly, and it eventually adds up. And as an owner of an establishment, you are held responsible for any violations that are committed by the esthetician. So have them perform regular self-inspections. It's quick, it's simple, and it usually keeps people right on track for making sure there's no violations.
So the webcast for that, the website for that is www.barbercosmo.ca.gov. And up at the top, you'll see a little blue button that says Forms and Publications. Just click on that and look for the self-inspection sheet. And there's also a little trifold brochure called What to Expect When You're Inspected. It will give you an overview of the inspection process, what to look for when the inspector does visit your med spa.
We also have a link on our website to send us an email. Our emails are usually answered within 24 to 48 hours. I don't recommend calling a state office. You could get caught in a phone tree for a long time. But if you send an email, if you have any questions at all, and send an email, the person who responds to our emails will get it to the right person. You'll usually get a response very quickly. So always ask a question, and we're happy to help anytime.
The pretty new thing about the lash tinting, is that in just California?
No, it's the FDA has put an import alert on any tinting and has said that tinting around the eye area can't be done. There's no product available right now. So we didn't take it out of our curriculum, so students in school are still taught the process, because we're hoping a manufacturer will come out with something that can be approved. But right now, if the product itself is found, it's a violation.
That's eyelash and eyebrow?
Yes.
Was that an esthetician that got in trouble for, or was it a nail person?
It wasn't in California, actually. It was just that the FDA had reached out to us. So it came actually from the FDA. It actually, we have not had any issues with it.
No consumer harm that we've seen.
How often are your establishment license renewed?
Every 2 years, and it's $50.
And you send out a notice telling them that their establishment is renewed?
And a renewal notice goes out about 90 days in advance.
And that's in relation to an establishment license.
For the establishment, correct.
Okay.
And everybody gets that?
All the establishments get a renewal notice, as well as our individual licensees. So the esthetician would get a notice about 90 days in advance as well for renewal.
And we'll make sure to post all this information, if it's okay with you, on our website, and make sure we get it out. We've got a great relationship with, and they've been very, very helpful. So and of course, if there's anything more that comes out, we're happy to help publish it. Are you going to stick around for a little bit?
Yes.
Okay, so they will be here for additional questions. And I can't thank you guys enough for coming. I really, really appreciate it.
Thank you for having us.
I think the key takeaways here is just to make sure when we're talking about microneedling to keep your estheticians out of the line of fire. Okay? Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Thanks so much for coming. We've got lunch, which we'll do for